Welcome to 2020, Twin Flames.
We
Happy
made it.
New Year.
We made it.
Yeah, man, we survived it. Go, us, all of you. If you're watching this, and yeah, we're talking to you. So today we got a really
Making
cool
sure we don't have any wild animals running around back here.
No,
Circus
just
over
a
here.
bunny in a cage. I forgot to turn off the bells on this. All right.
Yes, we did.
So today we're going to talk about assumption.
Turn
And
off the bells on this.
my beautiful twin said assumption is the septic tank of connection. Wow. But are you so right?
You know what goes in a septic tank?
Yes, we do. All the shit.
Ah.
All the piss and all the vinegar.
Well, wouldn't you think that that's where assumption should be?
Well, I think we should give some pretty good examples of what assumption is, because we learn assumption at a very early age.
Yeah, we do.
We
We
really
assume somebody is going to bring us something to eat when we cry.
We assume that the reason that their behavior is acting a certain way, that we tell ourselves that they don't love us, or that they don't think we're good enough, or that we don't think that we deserve it. You know, all of those things too, because unless they physically say it or verbally say it out loud, we actually go inside and take assumption, which feeds off of, well, assumption literally is the main course of you feeding on your own wounds. So, yeah, it happens. So what happens is when we get wounded, we go into assumption. And assumption is the story we got to tell ourselves about why we just got wounded and what the behavior of the other person is. And we practice this for a long time until it makes sense to us to tell ourselves this is what's going to be coming at us all the time.
Well, to me, assumption is just answers and closure.
Ooh. Answers and closure to
comment
what?
on that?
Yes, please explain that. Please try.
Okay. Let's start with this amazing analogy.
Okay.
So, I can assume, right,
Mm-hmm.
that you would like to have dinner.
Oh, okay.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And if I ask you what's for dinner, I'm going to assume you're going to tell me what you don't, or what you want for dinner.
Right.
If you do not, I'm going to assume you want liver and onion.
Ew.
Okay?
Right.
So when I make liver and onions, which I don't, but
Mhm.
if I did,
Right.
I would make it for you.
Oh.
And right? Because if we don't get the answers we need in clear communication, all we have left is assumption.
Mm.
So if I ask you what you would like for dinner and you say you don't care, you don't mind, then I'm assuming you don't mind if I make liver and onions.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm on.
Well, then why was I left to assume that you weren't?
Because when you actually started making up things in your mind, you wanted to make something in your mind that would make sure that I would reject it, so that way you could be right about being rejected.
I wasn't right about being rejected. I was right in my assumption.
You were right in your assumption that you would be rejected, and then you create something that actually makes you get rejected. Does that make sense?
You just assume that I'm rejected.
Well, when
I'm
I
having
look
good-
at that
I'm having
food,
a
when I
good
look at
time.
that food and tell you I'm not eating that shit.
I'm having a good time with the liver and onions. What if I like liver and onions?
Well,
Don't assume that I don't like liver and onions.
Well, let's get off the whole dinner thing and let's talk about something
Okay.
more emotional.
Can it be different?
Yeah, it could be different.
Okay.
So, like, if you assume that I don't want to, let's say, hug you or talk to you or kiss you or be with you.
Mm-hmm.
When you go through that in your mind, what do you tell yourself is the reason why that seems to be the behavior that's in front of you?
I'm going to assume that it's something I have done, said, or acted, or reacted.
Okay. But your assumption doesn't actually ask me a question, does it? Right.
On time, sometimes.
Really? Because
Sometimes.
here's how the questions come out. You just don't want anything to do with me, do you? That's not a question. That's the assumption's already won, right?
Do they do that?
What? Don't we?
I mean,
I think we all do it.
yeah, but oh, you're right.
I mean, we will literally go through why we're being treated a certain kind of way. And this is where we become the most profound behavioral specialist on the planet. We pay attention to all of these different behaviors growing up, so we know what the behavior means. We've translated them into words, and that is the assumption.
Mm.
And this connection, it's the shit. I mean, the septic tank of the connection. You were absolutely, when you said that, I was like, wow.
Well, because all of our fears are in that septic tank, right?
Yes.
So, for instance, if my daughter leaves, right, or my son, one of my children leave, and they're supposed to be back, and they don't get back in time, and they don't call and communicate, right? I mean, my girls are grown and gone, but when they were, I would assume, because I had no communication from them, that they were in a ditch on the side of the road where nobody will find them till morning.
Right.
Because that assumption is down there in the septic tank of, you know what I mean?
Fear.
But yeah, it's down there. And we do it with the ones we're connected to. I was getting ready to say the TF word. The twin flame word. We do that. Oh, they're sleeping around. Oh, they're having an affair. The assumption of, oh, we're gonna. There's a dog.
There's a puppy.
Hey, puppy. Hey. You. Well, he's a little busy tearing something up.
He's got cotton in his mouth. Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Can I have that? Thank you.
You don't need to eat that.
Thank you.
You've already pooped out string.
Thank you, Santa Claus.
A puppy that poops out string is not a good dog. So in this assumption thing, though, think about everything that we have found when it comes to this connection, as powerful, as mystical, as magical as this connection is, there's always this underlying ego that seems to make sure that it draws from the assumptions of every wound you've ever experienced. And when that happens, you literally start replaying everything back off. And this is the way history repeats itself. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because my behavior, like if I go and do something, you will actually access something that actually brings back a child in you that actually says, this is why I'm doing that. And then you actually come into the wounds that we always point to, the wounds of not good enough, deserve, and all of that shit in the septic tank gets pulled up. And it's now not in your connection, but it's now in your attachment to what was. Because you really assume that everything is going to be this way in the future. Everything that was in the past. He wants to play with the bone.
There it is.
We assume the dog realizes we're shooting a video, and he's purposely doing this to, I don't know, see how you guys all treat him. So, Craig,
it's like
you're about to get fired on your day off.
It is. It's like having a toddler. I mean, we're grandparents.
He literally been quiet this whole time.
We're grandparents. We love on them and then send them home.
Yeah.
This one hasn't left. Hi, Craig. Hi, Craig.
You can't stand on the ball. Say you're getting so clumsy and so wobbly.
Yeah.
You just
say hi to everybody.
Say hi, everybody.
They all wanting to see you. Okay. Nobody really does, Craig.
So, in a lot of ways, assumption is not going to do anything more than actually keep you repeating the story. And as long as you're repeating things such as, I'm not good enough, they don't, they would rather, somebody else is better, I'm not enough. I mean, literally all of that assumption, when you actually start getting that on the inside of you, when you actually are transmitting that into your body, that's why the connection needs to separate, because this is your separation inside of yourself. Assumption and the septic tank of connection actually create your separations. Because realistically, without assumptions, how you get accepted by anyone? You assume they won't accept you, so you have to be right about that, so you keep your assumptions so they can't accept you, so that's your separation.
We always assume the worst first off. First thing. We always assume the worst. he don't want to be with me, she don't want to be with me, he's having an affair, she's having an affair,
Marrying somebody
she's
else.
marrying somebody else, oh they're gonna get pregnant. It's the end of the world. It's always the end of the world. You always assume the worst.
Did you have to drop your assumptions to be with me?
Yes.
All right. Remember, assumptions are that powerful. Pay attention to yours, because sometimes they'll do some of the worst things to you.
Well, okay. So we'll change scenery,
Well, assumption,
change
right?
of clothes.
More,
New day.
more and more, assumption seems to be more at the forefront when it comes to connection. But it's also the separating factor of connection, because you have to assume based on the wounds of what you've experienced for pretty much your whole life, what something means by somebody's behavior, what something means by their actions. I mean, assumption is a very funny thing, and we never expose our assumptions. We always need to validate them.
Mm-hmm. We were disturbed making the last video, so we resumed. So I'm not exactly sure where we were, but I want to get into the meat of where we were going. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think one of the major conflicts in relationship is, well, it's obviously communication, but assumption from the lack of communication. I really want to do a communication series because it's a problem. Because when we don't have the information, we have no choice but to assume and judge. So we judge from past experiences, and then we have to assume that those past experiences are going to be the same pattern because there's been no communication otherwise.
Right.
So we assume the worst. We assume that person's going to come in with that energy. We assume that person's going to cheat. We assume the person's laying in a ditch. We assume the person's drowned in the bottom of the pool. We assume they're cheating. We assume all of these things, right? And our reaction is off of the assumption, not off of the truth.
Which usually is a thought that you know how they're thinking. I don't know any better way to say it. We literally will go through a process in our thoughts that tell us, based on somebody's behavior, based on how they're responding, based on how they're either showing up or not showing up, whether you've been ghosted or not, you literally have to insert information here to explain their behavior, and usually you make it against yourself and say they did it. And we're so used to doing this, and everybody's doing it, that everybody considers that normal. When in truth, people validate your disconnect to yourself to validate why you're disconnected outside of yourself. It's almost, I'd say more times than not, we can trace a lot of things down by, okay, so tell us about when they looked you directly in the eyes and they said those exact words to you, and we hear they said it, and you can see the defense that comes from the thought forms come forward, and then there's a little slide remark in between here that says they didn't use those words. Wait, how is that them saying it again? And do you realize that this can be one of your greatest disconnects in this connection? If the words don't come from them, don't insert words there, because you're thinking for them, which means you're thinking for you, which means that ultimately your thoughts have done what to you? And if this is the ego that you accept, you have no room for this connection. See? It may sound complex, but it really isn't. It's much more simple than we actually are saying it. It's hard to get rid of because you haven't investigated the wounds and what the wounds have told you about yourself. Why did this happen to you? Why me? Why me? Why me? But you never realized that you just inherited something that probably came from a generational chain of events. Assumption. I believe you are absolutely correct. It is the septic tank of connection. It is powered by every wound, empowered by everything that's ever been done to you or that you've done to others. It's explosive and very painful. But when do you expose your assumptions? We recently had somebody reach out to us, and I thought that you guys and nobody wanted it, and we were like, where is this? We were like completely thrown off, like, whoa, where did that come from? And then we went, huh. But we were all like, what did we do? And it's interesting because the behavior of the absence creates the behavior of thought that comes into assumption that literally you're telling yourself how somebody thinks about you, and you're going to have to be right about it. So you're going to treat them according to the way you think about you, or tell yourself that they think about you.
Wow, yeah.
It's so deep.
If you are assuming that your partner is having an affair and they're not, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to treat them as if they are.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, absolutely.
For sure. You're going to treat them as if they are. Which, in relationship, could push them to.
Mm-hmm.
You manifest it.
You're cheating on yourself to get them to cheat on you.
You manifest it. Pay no attention to the puppy in the middle trying to cause trouble. It's like a toddler. It's like having a toddler.
It's all that love. So it's assumption is nothing more
than mind trickery.
Yeah, but it's also insert what you think that they think is here. And when you insert it, I mean, we learned this. If you go all the way back into your childhood, you're going to find spaces where you did that and just got used to it. And then you never stopped. So here we are right before a major eclipse, right before a major full moon. And you were starting to realize that the full moon is actually going to represent, are you going to purge your assumptions, or are you going to keep them?
Hey, little doll, making so much noise.
You got the remote.
We're busy. We're really busy over here.
And it hasn't made a sound this entire time.
All
these
day,
sessions didn't
no
make
sound.
one sound, not one, not even a little. So he wanted to say hi, so I guess this is his way of making sure that this is the Craig show.
We are going to be starting a podcast this month on our Patreon channel. And I really want to take it in a direction of communication and assumption. And how it does affect a relationship, union, connection, right? You can go for 3 days and not speak to someone that you're connected to because you think that they think, right? That they don't want to be around you.
Yeah.
So you can go for days, sometimes weeks. A divorce, as breakup, could be on an assumption, right? Yeah. Well, I wasn't cheating. You know what I mean?
Right.
I wasn't, right? But 17 years of you are, and I needed to get out of here. You know, it happens a lot of times in addictions too, and people with addictions. Yeah. And people with certain, different pasts too. If you have a past where you haven't been as honest or as, you know what I mean, something happens, they're going to assume the worst, right? Because people don't like to accept and acknowledge that major change can happen. Right? They don't, as human beings, we don't want to see a womanizer change into an honorable human being. We don't want to see that. We don't want to think it's possible. So we're going to assume once a cheater, always a cheater. Right. And we're going to treat our partners as if they were who they used to be.
I assumed that you believed I would never be able to stop cheating. So basically what we have an attachment to assumption. If something doesn't have an explanation, if we have unanswered emotions, we will attach assumption into a space to make it make sense, to make us right so we can be left.
Right.
And it's almost like we're not even paying attention that we keep inserting assumption into things. We will assert assumption into a lot of our unanswered emotions.
Well, it's because it's unanswered. An assumption gives us answers and closure. Okay?
Or disconnect.
Right. As I said before, if we're confused, we need clarity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why did they leave? Why did they say that? Well, it has to be because of this. It has to be because of that. Oh, it has to be because they don't want to be with me anymore. It has to be the worst of the worst because there's no communication on what's really going on, what the root of it is, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I can assume all day, you know what I mean? Because, you know, I find out there's something medically going on with me that everybody disperses, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and I watch it happen,
Yep.
right? And it's a lot of assumption. Nobody's talking,
Right.
you know, and nobody's saying, you know, how you feeling? What is the outcome of this? What are you going to do? You know what I mean? Do you got this worked out? You know what I mean? Anything, right? They just assume the worst at all times, and I don't see getting rid of assumption. I just don't, unless you are recognizing that that's what you're doing a lot of the time.
Right.
There's good assumption and bad assumption, just along with everything else, right?
The judgment of assumption.
The judgment of assumption.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that assumption also creates an energy field of why you won't let certain people get close to you or get, you see what I'm saying?
Yes,
it's
for
like
sure.
Once you are right in your assumption, you actually don't even see how it creates a runner in you where the other person's chasing you because they can't get you to change your mind about what you've assumed. And what happens is when that happens is you haven't taken the time to listen to yourself, so they can't listen to you either. Is your assumption your truth? And if you're making that your truth,
Go ahead.
is that really something you want to do anymore? I mean, there's a point where you have to reach and tell yourself the truth. I am attached to assumption to make sense of my wounds. And that assumption is showing up in everybody around me. Assumption is the leading cause of addiction. The number one energy that really kind of feeds addiction, feeds fear, feeds isolation,
We
feeds
assume
loneliness.
nobody loves us. We assume nobody cares. So we're going to do what we're going to do.
Don't matter, not good enough. And it's like you go down the list. I mean, we've been talking about that for a minute because once we actually went in and investigated it, there were times where you felt like I didn't want this or want to be close to you and that kind of thing. And that assumption created an energy field between us that either let me get close to you or got pushed away from you. And you thought it was me pushing away from you. But if I'm you, guess what it feels like? It feels like I'm pushing away from you. But it's almost like you can't see this because you won't go into the assumption to find out what's true and what's not. The more you know, the more you can realize that when you're in assumption, you're not letting anyone get close to you. You're actually keeping everyone away from you. And how can you be loved with assumption?
What's going on behind us?
I'm afraid.
We're going to call this the zoo. What? Oh, the bunnies in the litter box.
Yes. Hey, good bunny.
He is. Let me try to give them a view of the goings on here at the Patterson Ranch.
Don't know what happened to Yehu.
Nah, he's around. What are you doing? Hi, Blue. Are we disturbing you?
He's trying to
We're
chew
probably
his edge there.
we're probably disturbing him. He's trying to have private time.
Probably. So,
Fine.
assumption. If you need help with assumption, if you need some ways to see how it's connected to you, it's not connected to you. You're attached to it. What do you need assumption for? Has it done anything good for you? Assumption is not the truth. And it's hard to be connected if you're not in the truth. So if you're looking for what causes separation, look for what you assume first, find the truth, then see if the truth matches your assumption. Remember, the truth means it has spoken to you directly, said to you directly. You can't take something that never entered you and then create what that is, let what's coming to you be the truth so you can respond according to the truth. I mean, we find ways to mess this up all the time. An example would be somebody says, you know, I don't know that I want to be you living on this side of town and me living on this side of the town. I don't think that's what I want. What you will hear is, oh, they don't want me. And that's not even what was said. They're saying, let's find a way to come together, or they left that space open to see if that was something you would be interested in. But when you assume that they don't want you, what did you hear? What were you listening to? I mean, you've got listening skills, you've got all of these senses that are working for you, but your mind may be working against you if it's an assumption. How are you going to have an open heart and have assumption?
Mm.
I think that's a good place to stop, I think.
Yeah.
Unless you got something to add.
Mm-mm.
Hmm?
No. That's powerful.
We're here. We're listening. And check out Connection Tour 2020.
Conscious Connection.
Conscious Connection 2020.
Conscious Connection 2020 tour with me and Lee and I. We're going to be coming all over the place.
That's a good question. Is assumption a conscious or unconscious result?
Ooh, that's big. I'd like to hear you guys' answers.
Yeah, let's see it post below. Is assumption a conscious or unconscious result?
And here go the dogs.
All right.
All
We
right.
will see you soon.